All right. Welcome, Sarah. Go ahead.
All right. So I'm first going to start just by introducing myself. My name's Sarah Wayland, as Marley said, and I have two kids who are autistic, and they are actually 19 and 23. So I've been traveling this path for a while now. Um, and one thing that I love seeing is that our knowledge and understanding about how to help families is so much better than it was when my kids were little. So my oldest kid is 23, and he was diagnosed at 5 with ADHD and a pretty severe language delay. So he actually was below the first percentile for language skills at that point. He didn't get an autism diagnosis till he was 9, when his younger brother was diagnosed with autism at the age of 4. And so we've been slogging our way through this for quite a while now, and I've learned a lot in the process. And one of the things I really feel passionate about is sharing my hard-won knowledge with other parents. So I hope this will be helpful to you. Um, the topic tonight, the rumble rage cycle and how to help your child with big emotions, is, as we discussed before the recording started, is one of the biggest challenges families deal with. So when you have a kid who has big emotions and emotes all over you, it can be really hard to stay calm, and it also can be really hard to help them figure out how to navigate those emotions, because it's very overwhelming for them, just as it's overwhelming for us as their parents. And when I first learned about the rumble rage cycle, it was a parenting class I was taking, and just understanding what was going on for my kids at different phases of the rumble rage cycle and how to help them really changed how I was able to stay calm and loving in the moments when they were really losing it. so um, so we're going to start out by talking about the brain, and this comes into play because it will help you understand what strategies will work at different phases of the rumble rage cycle. The three parts of the brain that we really care about for this are the brainstem and the cerebellum, which are the oldest parts of the brain. You'll hear people call that the lizard brain. But this is the part of the brain that's in charge of responding instinctually to things. So, reptiles, they can stay warm, they can run away from things that are bothering them, they can eat when they're hungry, but there's not a whole lot of thought or, necessarily nurturing and caring and all that stuff. But those old brain structures, the brainstem and cerebellum, are really responsible for just keeping us alive. And they're always online. They're always there trying to keep our bodies alive. And so the limbic system is the next oldest system, and this system is actually you'll see it well developed in mammals like mice or cats, dogs, whatever. But the limbic system is where memories are formed, but it's also where our emotions come from. So there are parts of the limbic system, like the amygdala, um, and so on, where big emotions come from. And so, these big emotions can be wonderful, warm, loving emotions, and they can also be really scary, big, uh, violent emotions. And so, but that the limbic system is where those are processed. And then wrapping around all that in humans is this very thick neocortex. And other animals have a neocortex, but it's much thinner. But in humans, it's a big part of the brain, and that's where higher order thinking happens. So this is where we understand language, but also how we are rational about things. So if somebody says, hey, here's a problem, and you go about trying to figure out how to solve it, that's happening in the neocortex. So, a very long time ago, this concept of the triune brain, so I think it was in the 1960s that people first came up with this concept. Then they talked about these three parts of the brain. So they talked about the brain stem and the cerebellum, and the fact that that's just what your body does. You have no control over that, and that's when what you is in charge when you see somebody in fight, flight, or freeze. So people talk a lot about fight or flight, but they don't always talk about freeze. But freeze is also a dysregulation state, and I'll explain later why that's so important. Um, the emotional brain, like I said, is the limbic system with emotions and memories and habits, and these are instinctually based decisions, but you can turn them on and off. Um, the thinking brain is this reasoning and rational thought. And what happens is when our brain is working and we're all calm and doing things the way we want to, then all three parts of the brain are working together. There's this guy named Dan Siegel. I don't know if you can see my video right now, but he has this model that's called the hand model of the brain. And so he talks about the brain like this part here is the brainstem and the cerebellum, and this part here, this is the limbic system, and then you have the neocortex that wraps around that. And he talks about what happens when you flip your lid. So you start getting upset and your neocortex goes offline, and then you're governed by those instinctually based decisions. And when that goes offline, then you're just on autopilot in fight, flight, or freeze. And then each system, as you calm down, will gradually come back online so that you can think rationally. But I really like that hand model of the brain and thinking about flipping your lid like that. Also, kids like that because it's really easy to remember. So the rumble rage cycle, this woman named Brenda Smith Miles first came up with it in the context of a book she wrote called Asperger's Syndrome and Difficult Moments. And she's changed the name over the years because now we don't have Asperger's Syndrome, we have high functioning autism. But the rumble rage cycle just talks about, so on the up and down axis, the y-axis, we have how dysregulated your kid is. Okay, so your kid is really dysregulated the higher they are on this curve. And then it's time over this axis. So what happens here is that when you're in those teachable moments, okay, all the parts of your brain are online. Your thinking brain is online, your limbic system's online, everything's working, and you can be rational and you can learn and you can process language and so on. But as you're going along, something might happen. So this first dotted line here, just think about something happening that might trigger your child. So for example, with my younger child, something that might trigger him would be a loud noise. He's very sensitive to noise. So let's say, as I did, making a mistake with him when he was young, I would take him to carnivals or something that I thought he would enjoy, but he didn't actually enjoy them. And so we would take him to some loud thing, and it would be loud, and he would start rumbling. And this means his thinking brain went offline. And so then all he had was his emotional brain and his autopilot, his lizard brain online, okay? And if we didn't realize what we were doing, which it took us a long time to realize what was triggering these things, then if you can figure out what's going on, so like I actually always carry earplugs, like foam earplugs with me now, and my kids do sometimes wear noise canceling headphones just to reduce the sound for them. But if you can't figure it out, they're going to keep getting more and more upset and dysregulated, and eventually they're going to trip past this second line here, which is what I call the point of no return. And so what happens there is that you shift into that lizard brain or that survival brain. And so, and Brenda Smith Miles calls that the rage. And the rage is all the parts of the brain are offline except that survival brain. And at that point, all you can do is keep everybody safe because there's no reasoning because your logical brain is offline. There's no comforting because that limbic system, the comforting brain is offline. All you can do is just keep everybody safe. Eventually, the kid will move through the rage and they'll start calming down. And if you can avoid re-triggering them, eventually they'll shift back into recovery. And what that means is that the limbic system will come back online. So you could comfort them if they want to be comforted. And the thing is that some kids actually are so ashamed of what happened during the rage that they are embarrassed, and so they want to hide for a while. So kids are different. Like my younger son always wanted me to hold him, and my older son just would hide. And he needed to be by himself for a while to calm down. And eventually that neocortex comes back online, and then you're back into the thinking brain where all three parts of the brain are working together. So those are the phases of that rumble rage cycle. And one of the things I did want to say is rages can last different amounts of time for different kids. So for some kids, it's almost like a flash and then they're done. And I have had clients who, I'm not kidding you, the rage could last for days. So it's really variable, and it really just depends on the kid you're working with. So what do you do during each of those phases? So now you know which parts of the brain are online during each phase. You can guess what kinds of strategies may work. So when everything's online, you can think about an upcoming situation that might be upsetting. Hey, we're going to go to a carnival this afternoon. There's going to be a band playing. What should we do about that? And we can all brainstorm and think together about what we could do ahead of time, because nothing's triggering them at that moment. However, if they flip their lid and that neocortex is offline, then they can't think. They also can't listen to language. So something that often many parents, and myself is definitely one of them, will say things like, "Stop doing that. What are you thinking? What are you doing?" We ask them questions, or we'll say, "Hey, you need to calm down," or "Can you just get it together and get back in the car?" or whatever we might say to them, right? But they're not processing it because their brain is offline. Okay, so that thinking, problem solving brain, that rational brain, is offline. Now, because the limbic system is still in play here, they might respond to comforting. So if you say, "Oh, I see you're not doing well," and you use calm, comforting words and maybe give them a hug. Some kids don't want to be hugged in that moment. They may want to be left alone. But if you can be a calm, loving presence, then they can understand that, okay, my parent thinks it's okay, maybe I can calm myself down. So comforting might work. However, as I said earlier, when you move out of that limbic system mode, you are in survival mode. Your kid is literally in survival mode, and they can't process a thing you are saying, and they actually also don't respond very well to you like trying to comfort them. So they may say, "Get away from me, I don't want you around," or they may hit you or punch you or whatever, because they are just totally in survival mode. There's nothing rational going on there. And again, as they calm down, then the comforting can work. So as they get better, you can, try to try to convince them that it's going to be okay. And eventually all those brain systems will come back online. And then you can think about what happened and try to avoid re-triggering it by talking about it. Because my younger son is always telling me, "I don't want to talk about my former self." So he really doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to talk about it or think about it. Because he's frankly embarrassed by what happened, because a lot of what they do during those stages is very hurtful. And I think it's so important to remember that it's not under their conscious control. They're doing the best they can, but at that point they have shifted into fight or flight. And so it's very hard to step back and just say, "Okay, this isn't my kid. This is like my kid very, very, very scared or very, very upset." So trying to think about it that way, instead of my kid is deliberately trying to irritate me by being obnoxious or whatever. So it's if you can reframe the behavior you're seeing as they're having a hard time, as opposed to they're giving you a hard time. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. So I find trying to reframe that behavior as brain states makes me be a little more rational about how I'm responding to it. So I'm hoping it'll help you too. So the other thing to remember is that sometimes pressure will build up before you see it. So like with a pressure cooker, right? It's getting warmer and warmer, and you don't see anything on the outside until it gets up to pressure, and then you see the the it explodes. And so my way of representing that here is they look calm, 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 and then all of a sudden they just blow, right? So that's kind of the pressure cooker analogy. So you think everything's going okay, and then out of the blue, your kid explodes, and you're like, what happened? I thought everything was okay. The other thing that can happen, and I don't have a graph for this, but it's the same idea, is that the littlest trigger can move them straight through rumble and into rage without much time between. I find this happens a lot in kids with ADHD, and especially with the ones who have rejection sensitive dysphoria. So where they're just so sensitive to any perceived criticism or feeling that they have done something imperfectly or something like that. And so they'll just, it's like a flash, and there's hardly any time to intervene with them. So that can be super challenging, but it's definitely a thing. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that when Brenda Smith Miles made this graph, she had a curve that was for the kids, right? And then she also had another curve that was for the adults here. And I always say she was being very kind to the adults by putting us lower here, because I think we all know that when our kid starts rumbling and moves into rage, we respond in kind, right? It's very hard to keep our own regulation down because we are literally wired to respond in kind. So we are wired to respond the way they are responding. So I actually interviewed Brenda Smith Miles about this, and I asked her, I said, what's with this adult curve? Like, adults can be pretty crazy, you know? And she said, oh, yeah, they can. And we all know, too, that when we go there, it's worse for everybody. It's worse for our kids. It's worse for us. It's just not a good place to go. And so what she was trying to show here is that if you, as the adult, can stay calm in the moment and ride out that rage, that your child, remember I said we are wired to respond in kind to them. Well, they are also wired to respond in kind to us. So if we can stay calm, they can borrow our calm and calm down more quickly. And that's what she was trying to depict with the adults lower. And she was fully acknowledging that it's very hard to just stay perfectly calm because it's really difficult. And I actually, I always joke that I think I'd be a better mom if I were a robot, because then I could just stay perfectly calm, and then we would never get into what I call the cycle of crazy. So anyway, that's the adult curve. So it's just important to remember that you have your own rumble rage cycle. It is how we are wired, and trying to do something different is going against everything in you. So it's really hard work to do, but it is the thing your kid needs. So that's a tough ask. So the other thing that I like to, oh, there it is. Okay. So another thing I like to talk about is the fact that people have different calm down times. It is very common for a child to hit a rage and then they start calming down and you're still like, what was that? Oh my gosh, I'm so rattled, I can't even think straight. And they come to you and they're like, I need you to comfort me, I feel so terrible. And you're like, get out of here, you little booger. So it's you gotta remember that people have different calm down times. So if you're having a hard time being calm, you're just gonna have to tell your kid, you know what? I'm still kind of rattled. I still don't feel real good, and I need a little more time to calm down. Good luck with that. But if you can say that and just explain that to them, then it feels a little better. But it's very hard when you are still raging for, when they come to you for comfort, because you sure don't feel like comforting them in that moment. So it's tough, but just be aware of that. Okay, so now we're going to shift, and actually maybe what we'll do is pause just briefly here in case Eddie or Trudy have questions or anything you want to ask about before I shift into this next part of the presentation. Y'all are good? Yeah.
Yeah, we're good. We're agreeing with everything you're saying
Yeah,
so
it
far.
makes a lot of sense. We're just glad we don't deal with these multi-day rages, that they are relatively short-lived.
Yeah, I mean, 20 minutes feels like an eternity. And when you have a kid who is really bananas for hours, it just sucks your soul away. It's so hard. And of course, the kids are suffering terribly too. I think that's the thing to
Yeah,
really remember is
yeah.
how much they're suffering during those moments.
Yeah, I remember when his teacher would say, "Oh, like it's not bad behavior." And when he was in kindergarten or first grade, I had a hard time accepting that. Like, what do you mean? But I totally agree that it is involuntary and it is not. I mean, sure, he can choose to behave badly, but there's those times when he can't get out of it. He can't help it. He really can't.
Right. And I think, I don't know if I have it in this presentation. I'm kind of hoping I do, but if I don't talk about it, I want to. There's this concept of top-down behavior and bottom-up behavior. So what I'm talking about here with this rumble rage cycle is this concept of bottom-up behavior. So this is just instinctual, body-based stuff that happens. Behavior that's intentional has to be driven by the neocortex. So if your kid wants a candy
Okay.
bar in the checkout
Right.
line, that's going to be top-down behavior, right? So they're going to be upset because they can't get the candy bar or whatever. And sometimes what happens is a behavior that starts top-down devolves into bottom-up, right? So they want the candy bar and then they whip themselves into a frenzy, and then everything just goes all crazy,
Right.
and it's not under their control. So it's very
Right.
complicated to know, like, is this something they're doing on purpose or something that's just totally beyond their control. And of course, the way
Yeah.
they respond is different for those different situations. Okay, well, we're going to move on to a new section here, unless you have more things you want to say. Um, Okay. And this is just about the idea of how our emotions are coded in our brain. So one of the things that can help our kids learn to manage their emotions a little more effectively is, a strategy therapists will often say is name your emotions. You got to name it to tame it, they'll say. But the thing that's really hard about that is that it's the emotions are not necessarily fundamental. So this researcher, Lisa Feldman Barrett, did a lot of brain imaging studies. And what she was trying to do is to find out what part of the brain was active when you are angry, when you are sad, when you are happy, when you're, calm. She wanted to know what parts of the brain were lighting up. And what she found is that it was completely inconsistent. There was no consistency in which networks in the brain were active during these different emotions. And then she started talking to people from other cultures and realized that emotions are not necessarily a universal construct. So when I first learned about her work, I was actually listening to a podcast, and they were talking about a tribe in the Amazon that they were headhunters, and they don't have a concept in their language of anger. There's no anger in that culture. They don't know what anger is. Now they have those same feelings of anger, and what they say when they are feeling those feelings of anger is that they want to go on a headhunt, right? So it's propelling them to action. It's a feeling, I've got to do something. I've got to go get out there and do something. But they do not code it as anger. They code it a different way. And so what she started realizing is that actually each of us codes our emotions based on our past experiences of similar feelings. And then in our culture, we learn to label them. So, if your cat dies, then you feel sad. And then if you have another pet and your other pet dies, you think, oh, this is the same feelings I had when my cat died, and everybody told me that was called sadness. So you learn to label it as sadness. And in our culture, sadness is, it's a feeling that everybody knows. When you say I'm feeling sad, people know what that means. But it's really important to remember that that's not kind of a basic physiological thing. It's something we learn from being in our culture. So what Lisa Feldman Barrett and others have found is that what is coded in the brain is a feeling of safety. So a feeling of moving from not being safe or being stressed to feeling safe or feeling, normal, calm, whatever. And there are brain networks that are in charge of that called neuroception. So the brain networks that code this feeling of safety determine which parts of the brain are activated. Okay. So I'm going to show you an example here of a little baby shifting back and forth from feeling safe to not safe. And what you're going to watch this baby do, you're going to watch two things here. So what the video is the mom is in the room with the baby and she has a terrible cold. And so she's blowing her nose. And the sound of blowing her nose is scaring the baby. And you're going to watch the baby freak out. And then you're going to watch him do things to regulate himself. And I want you to watch what he's doing when he's regulating himself. And then I also want you to listen to the mom and what she's doing to try to help him be calm. And look how little he is as he's doing these things, okay?
Baby. Does Mommy's nose scare you when I blow it? Does that scare you when Mommy blows her nose? Yeah? Silly baby.
Okay, so what I find so interesting about this video is the baby is laughing to calm himself down. And that actually is something that happens. So horror movies actually make use of this. Very often they will do something where it's funny until it's not funny. And you'll be laughing and then you'll shift into being scared. So one of the things that we do to calm ourselves down, is to laugh, but to make sounds with our throat and to move our cheeks and things like that. These are all things that engage the safety system of our brain. And so the baby is calming himself down by moving and by laughing. And also look at how he's looking at his mom. He is laser locked with her, trying to co-regulate with her because she's calm. And what the mom is doing in that case is that she is speaking to him in this little sing-song voice, right? Oh, is the baby scared? Are you scared of Mommy blowing her nose? She's not yelling at him. She's using this sing-song voice to help calm him down. And so, you get the idea. But you see also that when he's really scared, he gets very stiff and he freezes. That's the freeze. When I was talking about fight, flight, or freeze, this mode here is freeze. And so he's really experiencing these full range of emotions in this little bitty baby. He's already trying to figure out how to regulate his emotions. And this is something that a lot of our kids have trouble with. They have trouble figuring out what strategies will help them regulate those emotions. So I'm going to shift into talking about those systems that move us between feeling safe and unsafe, and also, and I'm actually going to go back. Oops. So actually, I'm sorry. So I had neuroception going from safe to not safe. I'm now going to talk about the systems that move us from feeling activated to feeling lethargic, or like you can't move. So the sympathetic system is what primes your body for fight or flight. And it's the 10th cranial nerve is what it's called, and it just innervates every part of your body. So it gets your muscles, it gets your organs, and there are all these things that happen when you get activated, when you are getting ready to run away or to fight with the bear or whatever. And so your heart might beat faster, your lungs, you might breathe more shallowly, you're going to stop digesting. And because it doesn't make sense to do that when you're running for your life. So all these things happen, and also, your face, you're going to flush, because your heart's beating faster, there's more blood going to all your muscles, so you can get away from whatever you're doing or fight effectively. Then there's a second branch of this 10th cranial nerve, which is in charge of the parasympathetic system. And there are two branches of that. The ventral branch calms down your heart. So the parasympathetic system is in charge of calming you down. So the ventral branch, will make your heart beat more slowly when it gets activated. You'll breathe more deeply. Another thing that happens is your middle ear, your ear canal will actually constrict and get wider depending on how dysregulated you are. And this was a big eye opener for me, is that when your ear constricts like this, I don't know if you've ever had this feeling when you were so upset about something that it sounded like everything was a million miles away. That is your middle ear contracting. And when it opens back up, then you can hear more normally. And this is actually one reason it's hard to process language when you're dysregulated, is because your ear is constricting and you literally cannot hear. But it also innervates your cheeks and your mouth and your vocal cords. So all these things happen when you're feeling calmer and that ventral branch is operating the way it needs to. The dorsal branch is digestion. So if we don't digest food very well when we're stressed out about something. So that branch is in charge of calming us down, but also, making it possible to eat our food and to digest it and all that things. And those are active when you move into freeze. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term, that scared the poop out of me. So that's what that comes from. When that dorsal branch is active, it's because it has just everything has released. So when somebody loses bowel control, it's because they've shifted into that freeze mode, which is moderated by the dorsal branch. So like I said, this sympathetic system activates us, and the parasympathetic system it calms us down. And we're constantly moving between being more activated and being calmer or more lethargic to match the state we're in. So when we're activated, like that's great if you're playing soccer, right? We want to be activated. We want to be running around, kicking the ball, playing basketball, whatever. Like you want to be activated in that moment. But when you're trying to go to sleep, you don't want to be activated. You want to be calm. And so you are always shifting how much each of these systems is activated to match the energy level of whatever situation you're in. And this is something that's typically very hard for our kids. But what I can tell you is they know these things. Like even if they can't label sad or they can't label happy, they can label, yeah, I'm feeling activated right now, or I'm feeling unsafe right now. They get that. They totally get it. But what they oftentimes don't get is how that maps onto the cultural norms that we give them. So I talked a little bit about this, but when the sympathetic system is activated, your pupils get bigger, your muscles, your speech muscles tense, you scream, for example, your heart rate increases, and you also have stronger contractions, your lungs you're breathing faster, and so on. So all these things are happening. And I sent out a copy of the the slides for this, and this is all in there. So if you don't have that, let me know and I'll send this to you. But all these things are happening, while you're feeling activated. And so what does that look like in your kid? What does sympathetic nervous system look like? Your voice gets higher and louder, and often you speak really quickly. So if you ever do any public speaking, you'll notice people who are feeling nervous will sometimes speak loudly and very quickly, and it's hard to listen to them because they're going so fast. And that's partly because they're activated. Pounding heart, shallow breathing, your skin flushes, you sweat, stop digesting, and that's fight or flight. So the parasympathetic system, like I said, things, calm down. So your middle ear, your jaw and your face, you lose tone, you lose the ability to speak. Your heart slows, your lungs, don't take in as much air. So all these things are happening, and in particular, so my younger son, he was a fight, flight, or freeze kid in a big way. And one of the things that would happen to him regularly in school is he would get so scared by something, he would literally wet himself. And we could not figure out what was going on until I realized, oh, he's that scared of his teacher. Like, he's that scared. And she was the sweetest person on the planet. Like, in third grade, she was so sweet, but he was just terrified of doing something wrong or whatever. And if she corrected him, he just lost it. And it wasn't until I learned about this that it made sense to me that he just was moving into freeze mode, literally. So, what does that look like? They can't hear when they move into freeze mode. Or some kids get very sensitive to sounds. Okay, so they can't process sound the way you do when you're calm. They cannot understand people speaking. They also can't produce speech. So asking them any questions is not useful in this state. This one also was an eye-opener to me. Flat facial expression. When you move into freeze, your face, you lose muscle control on your face. So one of the symptoms of autism is like flat affect. And I started realizing that I think a lot of times these kids with flat affect they spend a lot of their time in freeze mode, where they're just like that, right? And so people say they're good kids, but actually they're in freeze. So that's a little scary. Their ability to control their voice is reduced, so they talk with flat intonation, which is another thing you sometimes see in autism, where kids talk kind of robotic. You'll hear people say that. And I think, again, it's a sign of dysregulation. Heart rate, breathing slows. Again, bowels and bladder empty, so this is freeze mode. So how do we deal with this? Like, how do we help our kids through this process? So one of the things that I hope you understand by the end of this is that that what you do as a parent can help your child respond in different ways. This experiment by Ed Tronick, I'm just going to let him explain it, but basically the premise of it is that parents are constantly giving kids cues about what is safe and what is not safe, and kids respond to that. So I'm just going to show you how powerful this is, even in very young children.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
So I find that video very difficult to watch. And it's one thing that's super challenging about kids who have been through trauma and also autistic kids is that very often their responses are different. So what happens, so you saw what was going on here was what we call co-regulation, okay? So the baby and the mother were co-regulating, they were interacting with each other, they were, doing things together, they were all together. When the mother stopped modulating what she was doing in response to the baby, then the baby was very distressed. What happens in kids who have been traumatized and also in autistic kids is that very often the responses they give us are not the same responses that we are used to getting from other people, and we don't know how to interpret that. And so then we try different things, and it may or may not work, and this fundamental thing called co-regulation can break down. And it's very hard to know how to comfort a child who doesn't respond to us in the way that, we have strategies for helping them calm down, but if those strategies don't actually work for them, that can be very, very difficult. And it really can put a break in the relationship. So that's hard. And you have to be aware, what is it that's causing the child to not be able to regulate with me? And so when I talked about the rumble rage cycle, I talked about noise, for example, being something that was hard for my child to process. That would break his ability to co-regulate with me. And so the way we get back to being calm is through co-regulation, but we have to be able to read the cues that our kids are giving us, and they have to be able to read the cues we're giving them to help them feel calmer. So how can you feel calm and safe? How can you help your child feel calm and safe? So I talked about co-regulation a minute ago. What you may need to do is step up the volume of your empathy and your responsiveness. So for example, when you saw the baby with the mom blowing her nose, the way she spoke was very dramatic. She was very, "Oh, is the baby feeling sad? Is mommy scaring the baby?" This is why parents move into that sing-song voice, is it's big changes in pitch. It's called prosody. That helps the kid feel more comfortable, but you do need to be more dramatic, even just to get their attention. Engaging facial expressions. So if you can show them you're feeling calm and feeling loving towards them. There's a self-reg is this approach to teaching parents and kids how to self-regulate, and they talk about soft eyes. So you look at your child with soft eyes, and And so, you have an engaging facial expression that helps your child feel calmer, and using that soothing tone of voice. And, like I said, that exaggerated prosody may be required to bypass the difficulty they're having hearing. It's one reason screaming works actually also, and I hate to say that, but it's just true. The other thing is if you can use inviting and slow paced gestures. So, for my son, when he started feeling upset, I learned to stand with my arms open like this so he could come to me when he was ready to. So if you stand like this, and you're looking, not inviting, and you're tense yourself because because things are all kinds of crazy around you, then your kid sees that and they are going to feel more stressed. So if you can make your body feel calmer, then they will also start feeling calmer. So through social connection is how your child can learn to calm down. So when you see your kids starting to rumble and you feel like you're starting to rumble, recognize that your body's having a response. How do you respond to feeling threatened? So for me, my husband actually notices that I lose my ability to understand him first. So he'll start talking to me, and if I'm getting upset, he'll say he knows I'm getting upset because I'm like, what are you saying? I just don't know what you're saying. So for him, that's a clue that I'm getting dysregulated. For me, I start feeling hot. That's one of the things I really notice is I start feeling hot. But everybody has different things. So some people sweat, some people start breathing faster. My ears do start ringing when I'm really upset. So, think about what is your body doing when you're feeling upset. And I think most parents know, like when you look at your kid, it's like they have a look. You can tell, uh-oh, things are not going well. You can see that, people say, oh, they get a look in their eyes and I know it's coming, right? And think about, okay, if this is happening, have I had a similar response in a different situation? And if you have, is the way you're reacting reasonable given the current situation? So something that a lot of parents who have kids with challenging behaviors will have kind of a post-traumatic stress response to the phone ringing, because very often it's the school saying your kid's losing it, you need to come get your kid at school, or just something. And so like I have a friend, we joke, like we can't have the phone ringing because every time it rings we both like shift into this mode of, oh no, here it comes again. We're going to have to deal with another crazy situation. And so if I can think, oh, it's just the phone ringing, it's actually just a spam phone call, that's really not a problem. My reaction is not reasonable given this current situation. It's based on previous situations that make me respond to that. And it's just so important to remember that you are creating stories that drive your feelings. So when the phone rings, the story might be, uh-oh, the school's calling for my kid, when actually it's just somebody trying to sell me new siding for my house or something. So think about whether your reaction is reasonable given the current situation. These are a couple of strategies. Now, remember I talked about how the parasympathetic system innervates parts of your face and your throat and so on. So this is the reason that breathing techniques actually work, is that doing these deliberate things that calm your body down actually help engage the parasympathetic system so you can calm down. So I have a pinwheel here because one thing they tell you to do is pinwheel breathing, where you pretend you're blowing on a pinwheel, and that engages these nerves here, and it's hard to stay upset when you're engaging those nerves. So breathing like that can be very helpful. Another one is what we call square breathing. And so I'm just going to talk you through some square breathing here just so you feel what it feels like. But the idea is and I'd like you to do this with me. So what I'd like you to do is breathe in for a count of 4, hold for a count of 4, out for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 4. And then you just repeat it. So I'm just going to go through 2 cycles of that, okay? So breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. In, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Hold, 2, 3, 4. So if you did that with me, you can feel like how it just almost immediately calms you down. And it's because you're using all those parasympathetic nerves to calm your body down and to actually breathe and, do all those things. So that's why taking a deep breath actually works to help you calm things down. Nature, so getting out in nature is something that can actually be very helpful. There's a whole lot of research showing that the more nature there is in our environment, the more trees and plants and things like that there are, the less crime there is, for example. And so just getting out for a walk in nature can be very helpful. And music, because again, you're engaging those parts of your body that are required to be calm. So, listening to music, melodies, calm melodies, things like that, these things can all calm us down. So think about what drains you, and this is true for your kid too. Identify your stressors, looking for patterns and sources. So I mentioned like loud noise. Another one for my son is bright light. He actually really can't tolerate lights, sunlight. So whenever he goes outside, he's always got his sunglasses on and his hat on because he really can't tolerate bright light, but he likes being outside. So think about what those stressors are for you and what those stressors are for your child, and plan ahead of time when you're in those teachable moments for how you're going to handle it when that trigger might send your kid into the rumble. Think about what's going to happen and look for those patterns so you can address them ahead of time. And then also make time to do things that actually you feel good about. So, our kids spend a lot of time doing things that are hard for them. Make sure they have time to do things that make them feel like, whole, complete people, that they are good at things and so on. And then, there's just the basics, like making sure you eat enough, making sure you sleep enough, and that's the tough one, and making sure you get enough exercise. These things are all really important to helping us be able to self-regulate. So that's the end. So I'll open it up for questions.
All right.